Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2020. I distinctly remember when I was younger that kind of having to remember to change the date at the beginning of a new year was a big deal, and you'd always forget and write the previous year. But I think as technology has evolved, that almost becomes a non-starter unless you're writing checks, which is actually quite common in America. Or in my case, every month when I write the updated community call dates in the slide decks that come out. But other than that, I don't seem to be running the year anymore. But Happy New Year anyways. And thank you for joining the call. It is early in January, and I know this call is usually a little bit lower attended, but we decided to pick what I would probably say is one of our biggest things we've shown on the graph for developers. I know in December, if you haven't watched the call that Daryl Miller did, who's my partner in crime here in Ina's team, he showed off all the PowerShell stuff, and Japheth, who is one of our engineers in Nairobi in Kenya, actually showed off some of the Graph Explorer things and what we've been doing there. And so this month, we're kind of going back to our pure developer roots. And this is a demo that we built, actually, for our Ignite session that we outsourced to Canvas, which is a company that Todd Baginski, who's on the call with us, will be presenting on as well. So I hope you enjoy this call. It's very graph heavy, but it's also very Microsoft Teams heavy as well, which is great to kind of start to see the overlap between the different engineering orgs within Microsoft 365 kind of come together to be able to tell a real user experience story powered by all the platform that we have available to us. So for those that don't know, we do run these calls monthly. It's the first Tuesday of every month. So next month's call will be same time, 8 a.m. PST on February the 4th, 2020. We don't have speakers lined up yet, so I've got a few ideas. But if you are doing things with a graph and you'd like to showcase them, we would love to have you on to present. We've had a bunch of really good MVPs on and non-MVPs as well. We'd love to hear from you. So please reach out, just jthake@microsoft.com, and we can get you scheduled in. So today on the call, as I've mentioned, we're going to kind of really just talk about the meetings capture app, and Nikola's actually going to talk, who's the PM that drives the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, which is a big part of this solution. And then, so essentially, I'll start off with a bit of an intro. Todd's going to go into the deeps of how it was actually built, and Nikola will go on about the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So if you want to follow us on Twitter, I'm not sure, my little birdie is halfway down. But yeah, if you want to keep in contact with us, we're very active on Twitter and share our kind of graph findings on the web as we read other people's blog posts and different things like that. Okay, so I'm going to actually just demo the application this morning, and then Todd and Nikola are going to go into a lot more detail about how this was done. So I'm going to Alt-tab over into an in-private browser in Microsoft Edge into one of our demo environments here. And today I'm actually Katie Jordan. 2020 means I get to pick a new alias to present as. Last year was Megan. This year I'm going back to Katie. And you'll see, if you're familiar with Microsoft Teams, that I've kind of hidden a bunch of teams that are in this developer environment just to highlight that today we're talking about the Contoso board team. And we have these quarterly meetings that we put together, and all of our board members have the ability to come in here and chat and discuss things within the environment. And we can obviously go and add new members to the board through the standard things that happen in Teams. But what we've actually built is a tab. We've called this application the meetings capture application. And what it allows me to do is, within the context of this particular Microsoft team, and in particular this particular channel of a team, we can go and create meetings that are in the future with agendas, with people attending, as well as pre-read documents, and even tasks that we can create to associate with people around those pre-reads. And then when the meeting's actually live, we can capture the notes of the meetings, update attachments, create new tasks and actions as we have discussions in the meetings, and then afterwards actually kind of publish that meeting and sign off if you want to be that official, like a lot of board meetings or committee meetings or governance council meetings do. So just to give you an idea about what we're doing here, when we create the meeting, I'm actually going to do one just as in context of what we're doing today, which is the community call for February discussion. And you can see that it's already added me as an attendee, but it's also added Elisa here, who is part of the Contoso board and has also been part of meetings in the past that I've worked on with that particular person. Now I can go in here and add a lot of other people in, and it's using a people picker here to make those suggestions. So I can go and add Todd, who's in the call here, and add him in as an attendee. And you can see that it's doing nice little simple things like adding their photos that are stored within the profiles inside of Microsoft 365. Now, in addition to that, we can say that although my next community call meeting is in February the 4th, I can actually go in and say, well, I do want to kind of start this discussion early, so I'm going to look for a time for 30 minutes on the 13th of January for these 3 people. And when you run find meeting times, what that's actually doing is running the get schedule in the background of the graph. And I can go in here and pick when everyone's available. And you can see there at 9:30 that not everyone is available to attend. So I'm going to pick that 10 to 10:30 time frame. And so we're going to review content from the Jan call. We're going to discuss potential speakers here. And then we're going to talk about content from engineering that we want to add. And obviously I can go in and add new attendees. And maybe there's some pre-reading before this meeting. Maybe I have already got a list of potential Microsoft Community Call members that I've been drafting in a Word document. And I can click Save. Now what that's obviously going to do is go create that meeting. It's going to send meeting invites to everyone. And it'll kind of do a nice summary of all of those events. So if I come over into Katie's calendar here, you'll see that there's existing ones that have been summarized where it's put those in. And if I go over onto the calendar, it will come through here that I've got one on this one is one I just created. And you can see that if I double click on it, it shows me all the members. It shows that not everyone's responded yet. I have automatically responded because I've created this meeting. And so it kind of integrates nicely with that calendar. And then when it comes to wanting to launch that and preview that meeting, if I just click there, it's going to tell me as I'm running this as the note taker within that meeting that Katie, which is me, has approved it. Elisa and Todd have not accepted the meeting, so maybe they might not turn up. Shows me the agenda we initially had, as well as those links to those pre-read documents we wanted. And then during the call, maybe we've got some notes, and I'm just going to throw in some nice lorem ipsum here for the sake of not seeing me type too much. And I can basically save those meetings at any point and keep resaving those as I go as a note taker. But I can also go through and add tasks. Now, I can go and create tasks that say I need to catch up with new speakers for March. And I'm going to assign that to Elisa, because Elisa's the one that normally does this. And then I'm going to make that as a deadline for the 20th and add that task. And under the covers, what that's doing is it's actually creating that planner task inside of a plan within the channel for this quarterly meeting. So if I go into my Microsoft To Do as Elisa, or I go into Planner as Elisa, essentially I'm going to see all those tasks showing up within my experience. Now, after the meeting's done, maybe I want to like wrap that up. Maybe I've got some final notes I need to do straight after the meeting, or like at the end of the day, I go back and I add some more notes because I've had my day full stacked of meetings. Then I can publish that meeting. And so what I can do here is when I click publish, that's going to go away and wrap all that up and capture it, and then summarize those notes into an email form and send those to all of the attendees. This means that if someone needs to shoot this to other people, if they weren't in the meeting but want to see the notes, they can. But also, the real benefit of this is the amount of times, like I'm on a bunch of different kind of governance teams here and V teams. If I want to find previous meetings, I just go to the channel where that V team actually discusses things, and I go to the meeting capture and I can see the history of all those meetings and go review the meeting minute notes from it. And so this is super useful. It is consistent. So if your whole organization used this approach, if you get invited to a new V team, you know where to go to look to see all those previous meetings and all the notes. And so if I jump back over to Outlook here and went into Katie's mail here, you'll see that community call for February is sent in the email. We've got a nice standardized format here, shows the attendees at the meeting. It shows what the agenda was. It shows the notes that we're taking during the meeting. but it also shows all the different tasks that were given and what's still outstanding. So because those people didn't do the pre-reading of that document that we attached, those tasks are still open, but you could go in there and mark those as closed. And when you publish the meeting, it wouldn't send those through. And we've done nice things like adding the fact that when you click on this, what we're actually doing is taking advantage of OneNote, which obviously we've created the notebook for that channel within the files section of Teams. And for every meeting that gets basically published, we go and create the OneNote notebook page for those. And so if you wanted to have OneNote on your phone or OneNote on your desktop, you could go and basically open this OneNote page in your application and have that on the go with you. And again, consistency, all of the meeting minutes will all be there underneath these different notebooks mapped to the team and the channel, which would essentially be a section within the OneNote. And then every single meeting here would then be the OneNote pages that get created. So we're leveraging a lot of different aspects of the Microsoft 365 platform here to work with a common scenario that people do within companies to run with meetings within the context of members of a team. So hopefully that gives you a good idea about what we've built. Todd, do you want to just quickly explain where they can find this? Because we have open sourced this now. And then I'd love you to go through some of the scenarios about what the biggest bits about this that we've done with Microsoft Graph and Teams in regards to kind of things like auth and what API calls we've done to get this to work.
Yeah, sounds good. I just put the link to the GitHub repo where I just pushed the code just within the last hour. So awesome. That's all there right now, and so everyone can get to that in the chat there. And I'm sure you'll put it in the meeting notes here too. So yeah, as Jeremy mentioned, we had the opportunity to work on this with Jeremy's team and a lot of other teams, and it was a sprint to get it done up to Ignite. And where I like to start with the story of this app is we basically had 10 business days of coding with 3 people on my team and myself doing architecture and code, 1 designer before we started writing the code, and 1 person, actually just me too, to kind of do business analyst on this project. So everything you see here got built in the course of when we conceptualized it till it was done, Jeremy, 4 weeks, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Actually 10 days of just dev. And what that also includes that Jeremy didn't even talk about is there's a SharePoint Framework web part. The whole installation process has been automated with an ARM template for all the Azure components, as well as scripting to deploy as many things as we can automatically. And so I'd like to start with that because if you think back to just 5 years ago, and if you tried to develop an app like this with Microsoft Office 365, before Graph existed, we would have to call all those different APIs individually and write our own auth into all of them. There's no way we could have got it done this quick. And then another thing that really sped the development of this was the Microsoft Graph Toolkit that Nikola made, and Nicholas as well. And I see them both on the call, and hats off to you guys again for all the help you gave us to get that done and the changes you made to help it match some of the requirements for this app. So the Graph Toolkit also really helped us get the front end of this built really quickly. And Jeremy's opened it up right here. And you can see here, this is the README. It tells you what this is all about. It tells you what prereqs you need to install. And I think I'll take over the sharing at this point, Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's interesting if you look at the code that makes this up, right? The majority is HTML. This is a C# solution, minimal JavaScript needed, and a very tiny bit of TypeScript for the SharePoint part. So one of the things that we wanted to do was make this as easy as possible for people to install on their end. So we've tried to automate as much of the installation as possible. At a high level, these 8 steps are what you will do to install the sample. And everything in here is talked about in very good detail. And it just says, hey, fill out this ARM template with these values, make these configurations, etc. After you're done with that, it also has the demo script And so the demo script is basically what you just saw Jeremy did. So if you're trying to figure out how to exercise all the features of this, and even more than what Jeremy showed, you can just flow through this demo script part here, and it really tells you what to do. We also have in the appendix a nice little cleanup, which shows how to delete data, and that is also a really good demonstration of how you can configure the Teams tab and write the code to allow you to use a single ASP.NET website to make multiple different versions of pages that you would surface in Teams. We also describe how you would add this app to a different team and a channel. I can imagine that many people, if they wanted to put this in their org, would probably want to add it to as many places as possible. Finally, at the bottom, we give some details about the Graph Toolkit, which Nick is going to go deeper on. We talk about the SQL Server database, which Jeremy didn't mention yet. We have a SQL Server database, and you can see here it stores information about agenda items, attendees, meetings, files associated with tasks, and channels. So there are some things we're doing to keep track of that metadata, to keep all that information in one spot. Finally, at the bottom, we talk about how the default attendees are actually added to meetings. Jeremy just touched on that, but this is the actual logic behind it, and it's all Graph. So it's a really cool thing to look at and just learn how you can use the Graph API. So let's take a look at and deep dive here on some of the code now. And where I'd like to start is just taking a look at the app. And as we take a look at the app here, I want to point out all the different pieces of the puzzle that Nick is going to dive deeper in on a bit that we used Microsoft Graph Toolkit for. So this list that you see right here, when you come to the app, this is actually using Microsoft Graph Toolkit control that will allow you to display all of the events that are upcoming on your calendar with some type of filter criteria. So that's how we built this control right here that shows us. Now, the part here for this card and the ability to email someone or see their email address, Jeremy didn't even touch on that. That's also built into that toolkit control. So it's great how many things you get along for the ride for free when you're using the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Other things that we got for free was when Jeremy made the new meeting, we had the people picker in there. That's a Graph Toolkit control. Here, the planner tasks, this whole right pane is a toolkit control, which will allow you to point it at a bucket in Planner and see the tasks for it. So there's toolkit controls scattered throughout this entire sample. To get into the code and really start diving into that a little deeper, what I'd like to do is kind of take a use case here and show you how the code maps to that use case from front to back. So the use case that I'd like to demonstrate for you here is the one back when Jeremy created the meeting and he found the available times for people. So I'm going to go back to the create meeting page here and show again what Jeremy did. So you have these people who are attendees of this meeting, and then you pick the date on which you want to have your meeting, and you pick the duration, let's make it on the 13th, that you want that meeting to occur for. And so then when you click find available times, as you saw, it's really fast. And it says, at this time, these people cannot attend. And notice these are the people again in our attendee list. And these are the places that people can attend. And so how did we do this? We did this with the Graph API. And this is what I'd like to show you end to end. How did we find the available time for them? And then after we found the available time for them, how did we display it when we went to the page in the meeting to say, did they accept this meeting or not? Which you'll see in just a sec when this page pops, these graphics right here. How do we make this determination as well? So let's take a look at the code here and start walking through. So one thing to point out about this particular sample is these details. This is what we built this on in the technologies. So this is a website deployed to Azure App Services, and that is actually hosting the web app you're seeing displayed in that tab in Teams. And in the back end, we have a SQL Azure database, And we're using a .NET Core 3.0, ASP.NET MVC Razor front-end website with the .NET Graph SDK in the back end. We're using the Graph Toolkit controls and this really nifty thing that Nick's going to talk about called the proxy provider for the Graph Toolkit controls. And finally, a SharePoint Framework web parts. So those are all the main pieces of our puzzle. We also have a web job too. So the code you're looking at right now is the ASP.NET website. This is the actual meeting capture app that you saw in the Teams tab. And if I take that use case I just talked about on how did we implement that find available times, it all starts here in the new meeting CS HTML file. And so you'll find that under views, meeting capture, new meeting down here. And I bet people have already cloned this repo or are looking at the code. So here's our new meeting, and inside of the new meeting, inside of here, I have that button that's going to find the time. There it is. Its ID is btn find time. So here's our front end. User clicks that. Then we have this JavaScript hooked up to it. And the JavaScript that is correlating with each page in the web app is up here under www.root.js. And so here's the new meeting JS file. And here's my click event you can see for that button. So we do some things here to basically parse different things out of the page on what did the user select as the criteria for when they would like the meeting to be. And then down here is actually when we go to the graph to get that data. We're using this JavaScript file here called Teams Helper. And you will also find that one under the JS file there. Essentially what Teams Helper is doing is Teams Helper is going to take the URL you say in that AJAX request, and it's going to make this request and invoke it. But when it invokes this request back into our web app, because this is our meeting capture controller, you'll see right here on the right, when it invokes this find available times in the meeting capture controller, it's actually going to do that, and it's going to add in the authorization token that it gets with Teams, and it's also going to inject the context of the current team and channel we're running in. And that's very important because we need that information because, as Jeremy mentioned, this is designed to work on an individual channel and team basis. So that's why we need that context of what team and channel we're in so we can make decisions on what data we put in that database and where we get it out and how we interact with things like the planner and the files and the tasks. So after Teams Helper invokes this, where is that? Well, that is actually in that meeting capture controller. So here's the find available times method we just invoked. And as you can see, when we're done, we're going to return some JSON of the schedule ID and the availability view here. But really, we don't do that in this method. We do that in this service class we created called search available time. So for all the different things that we interact with, we have this services folder. We have some calls we make against the base graph service. We have calls we make, in this case, against the calendar service. So if I open up the calendar service and I head over to that search available times, and there we are, right in here. It looked like I had it. Here we go. So here's search available times. So this is really at the point where we're actually using Graph. Up till now, we made sure that we had all the context that we had with Teams, and now we're going off to Graph to actually say, hey, go to the calendar, call get schedule, just like Jeremy mentioned. Pass in the schedules, which is a collection of all the schedules for all the meeting attendees, the time frame I'm searching between on my start and end here, and then that interval. That interval was, do I want it to be a 30-minute or a 60-minute meeting? And then that gives us back the availability for all those people. We're then able to come in and react to that information that we get back and run this code down here, where eventually, if you see this button that we're creating, this button and all this code here that's generating this HTML, that is actually the one that if we go back to our meetings and create a meeting, when I click the Find Available Time button right here, each one of these things in the pop-up that you'll see is that actual button that that code was mapping to. Looks like I may have exposed a bug, Jeremy. I clicked it before the page was fully loaded. Let's try that again. There we go. So each one of these here is the button that you saw back in the code right here. So that's kind of a front to back on how can you trace these calls if you're looking at this sample and trying to discover how did they do this one thing. Well, you can start in the user interface and the view, look at the JavaScript, see how that maps to the controller, and then trace it through the controller to the service class to find which Graph API or other API we use to get a job done. Jeremy, I think another nice pattern to show is also to take this one step further, right? And show once we got into the page, like I mentioned before, how do I determine if the person accepted the meeting or not? So I think I'll jump into that one next, if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, that was definitely one that we got a lot of feedback from Ignite. People were like, how are you doing that? And it's actually something that's been in the graph for a long time.
Yeah, it has. It really has. So let's see, make sure get the app loaded here. Back to this guy. And again, for context, everybody, the spot that I'm about to show you that we're creating here is the little spot that's going to say, did a person show up for the meeting or not? So I'm just gonna, there it is. This is what I'm going to show. How did I find out Katie accepted, but Lisa and myself did not? So if we come back to our code here, the follow-up meeting page right here is the one, we call it follow-up meeting. This is the one that you're filling out the details of what's happening during the meeting. And essentially, this is the part of the code right here where the attendees are listed. And you can see we're seeing if the attendees status response is equal to graph response type accepted, then we're going to use this SVG to render that icon. If not, then we're going to use the SVG down here. And what we actually got this SVG from was, it may look very similar to you. You've probably seen this before. This is how it looks inside of Teams native. So what we did is just took the SVG that made their icons and then reused it for these icons right here. And so when this particular model loads, we are using the graph under the hood to go determine what those attendees' responses were, and that comes out of our attendees model. And so again, graph used to make that determination, and then very easy, just an if statement on it and write some SVG and you're ready to go. There's another thing that Jeremy showed, which was the emails that you receive. And I had a lot of people ask me about how we made emails in a similar fashion for a different sample we worked on with Jeremy one time. And I bet they're going to ask again now. So I think I'll get ahead of the curve on that one and show everyone how we made those email templates. So here is the example of that nicely formatted email, that follow-up email that goes out when you click publish. So how did we make that? Well, the way we made that is you'll find this templates section down here at the very bottom of the solution. And meeting created is actually the template that's used to send that email I just showed you. And so here you can see this is just another view that we've defined. We have our custom styles in the top, and here's the HTML that actually implements it. In the follow-up meeting class, when we click the publish button, what eventually happens is in the meeting capture controller, this method right here called publish fires. And what we're doing in this method is we are assembling the email template view model, which the meeting created relies upon. And we're putting all this information into it that we're getting out of graph. So here you can see this is a graph call. We're getting events based on the team ID and the event ID. Eventually, this goes to graph through the calendar service. You can see there's also extensions that we have used with graph here to store some of our items. Here, this is the SQL database where we're interacting with the SQL database to go get data out of it. And the reason I wanted to also bring up the template is this is a good one-stop shop piece of the code, if you will, to demonstrate how we interacted with many different services, including the SQL database behind the scenes here. After all this information is assembled, we come down here and we use this view render service, which is built into ASP.NET Razor Engine. And if we call render to string async on it and we pass in the path to the template we want to render, along with the information for its model, we get back this string. And this string eventually actually represents the HTML that we want to use with all of the dynamic data put into it that we're about to send through Outlook. So after we get that information back, again, we go to another service class. In this case, it's the user service class, and we call send mail. So if I bounce over to that one, here you can see I'm taking in the subject, an array of mails, as well of emails to send it to, as well as the content that we used that Razor view to create for that HTML for us. And we assemble what our message looks like based on that. Specify don't put it in my sent items because I don't really need a record of that. And then again, here's the graph client, call send mail, pass in the message, and false right there, so I don't save it. So as you can see, the pattern for all these is very consistent. It always goes through the service class that we have and then through the Graph SDK to make these calls. So that's the back end pieces of it. One other thing that Jeremy did not show was the web job. And so let me show you what the output of the web job looks like and what that web job is responsible for. The web job runs all the time. And the web job's job is to look through all of the tasks that have been created for everybody in the whole planner associated with this meeting capture app. And its job is to say, I want to look at all these tasks. And if any of these tasks are not complete and the meeting they're associated with is less than 24 hours away, I'm going to send that person a reminder to go complete their pre-reading tasks. And this email right here is an example of doing just that. You can see it actually uses an adaptive card inside of it, which is pretty slick. And it says you have an upcoming meeting that requires you to review the documents for. Here's a list of the documents you need to review. And when you click view, it's going to take you directly to that PowerPoint file, which I actually deleted and cleaned it up. Because I deleted this meeting this was associated with. But that's right where it takes you. And so this is an excellent example of how you can use Graph with adaptive cards and web jobs and sending reminders and integration with tasks and calendars and things like that as well.
And also, Todd, I wanted to just add here, in the pre-day at Ignite, we had a very early prototype of something that the Outlook team are working on around those actionable messages that light up within Outlook, and where there was only the view button in what Todd just showed there as part of the adaptive card rendering of that actionable message. One of the things that the Outlook team are working on in both OA, the mobile and the desktop versions of Outlook, is that you can actually have a button there that not just calls a hyperlink, but can also call an API. And if that API is behind an authentication endpoint, when you click on the button, so in this case, it might say, I want to complete the task that I've done this pre-read without having to go into the plan to go complete the task or to view the task and then click check, is that it will recognize that the API is behind an auth wall and it will show you an OAuth prompt here. And then it will automatically go and mark that planner task as complete. The Outlook team are currently rolling that feature out across all the clients. And once that is in all the clients, we'll actually put that in the README and have that as a configurable toggle, because you do have to white label the environment for that actual message to work in that scenario. But it's a great way of showing that, again, if your user's on the road and they want to view the document and just mark it as complete without going into Planner to mark it, being able to do that directly into Outlook. So those actionable messages with the ability to call authenticated APIs is in the action buttons is something that's coming soon in Outlook.
Thanks for adding in all those details, Jeremy. That was quite one of a heck of a one to figure out, wasn't it? That was cool. The next, and you may have also noticed I have some unread emails here, that 3 of them that have occurred since the call started. So these are the emails that I'm logged in as my account here in this tenant. And so this is the actual meeting invite, what it looks like when you get it. You can see it includes the agenda, the attachments. Here's when I was assigned a task. Here you can see that I actually got assigned a task in Planner, and when Jeremy created that meeting because he uploaded a document. And then here is, again, that follow-up email that from what Jeremy sent. Now, the code back here for the web job, I'm not sure it's really so much interesting that it's worth time to spend time getting into how did we go look at the tasks and determine, did it need to send out an email or not, but you can probably do that one on your own. There's one more piece to the puzzle, though, we haven't shown yet, and that's the SharePoint framework piece. And so we also created this SharePoint framework web part. And the idea here was, well, it's nice that I'm getting a web bot telling me if I have pre-read tasks to do. And it's cool that I can log into Teams, that I can find out what tasks I have upcoming for me by looking at individual meetings. But what about if I just want to look at all the meetings that this app tracks that I'm a part of? And I want to look at all the tasks in those meetings that are either assigned to me or somebody else. Can I do that in one spot was the use case for building this. And so that's what this web part does. And I have it in edit mode to start to show you here that this web part, when it's not running inside of Teams, you put it in edit mode and you tell it the ID of the team that you're running against, as well as the channel where you've deployed it. And once you put those things in there, the web part knows where to go retrieve the information via the Graph API. Now, you probably noticed that this user interface looks very, very similar, except for the launch button over here. And the reason it does is because it's using, again, the same Microsoft Graph Toolkit control that lists the meetings here. And so when I click on the meeting, the one that Jeremy made, for example, now on the right side, again, we're using a Graph Toolkit control. And this one is basically the list of tasks for a given bucket. And so because each meeting creates its tasks in a separate bucket, this is reading from that bucket. And so we can also filter here on all the tasks were created or just the tasks that were created for me. We didn't have time to write any actions into this page to complete these tasks or change them, but that could easily be done by looking at the other code we made in the app there to make that take place. And the really neat part about this app is that this SharePoint Framework app can also run directly inside of Microsoft Team tab itself. So if I go take a look at this code here for the web part, this is the SharePoint Framework web part code I'm looking at now. And in this web part code, the first thing I'd like to point out is we're using React, we're using SharePoint Core Library. We are also using here the import for the Microsoft Graph controls. Inside of the actual component that is inside of the web part here, here's where we have our interfaces for the person, the agenda, and the tasks component that we use. Now, and there's not enough time to go through this whole thing, but at a high level, here you can see the agenda component. That was the one on the left side of the web part being used. And it has a click event registered for it that when you click one of them, it's going to fire load tasks. And so when load tasks fires, here you can see how we're using the tasks Graph Toolkit component, which is what you saw rendered on the right side of the screen. And so if we go back again, here, this is the tasks component, and this is the task component over here, events component on the left. There's one last interesting thing, well, actually more than one, but one I have time to talk about today in the code here. And this is in the actual initialization of our web part. Let me find it real quick. Here it is. So when the component mounts, if you're familiar with React, component did mount will fire. And inside of component did mount, here you can see where we go to and make a new graph service, and that's when we're going out to get the events by the group and channel. And here's our graph service class where we actually execute that call. And so this pattern has been around for a while inside of SharePoint Framework, but if you haven't seen it before, that's how these things are happening here. One last thing I'd like to loop back to and give you all a tour on that. It's not a code level detail, but it is a technical detail that should help you understand the solution better. When Jeremy created the new meeting, you saw that these attachments were stored somewhere, and we saw that planner tasks were getting created. Well, really, where are they getting created? In this particular team channel, I've put links to where they are so I can show you quickly. First of all, as we all know, when you create a team, you can create a place inside of SharePoint to store the files. So this is that place that comes with that inside of the channel on Teams. And so here's the one Jeremy just made 36 minutes ago, community call for February. When he created the new meeting, we made a folder to track that meeting, and we uploaded any of the meeting attachments to this location. We used the planner as well on a per channel basis. And here you can see ones that go back all the way to November 1st when we were getting ready for Ignite. The way that we're doing this is here's Jeremy's meeting he created. We're creating a bucket inside of this plan for each meeting that you create. And then we're using the tasks inside a planner. So these 3 pre-read tasks here were created automatically when Jeremy made the meeting. Notice there's one for each meeting attendee, myself, Elisa, and the account Jeremy used, Katie Jordan here, to make the meeting. So the logic is every time a new meeting is made, for each pre-reading document that's uploaded, give each meeting attendee a task to go read it. Here's the tasks that Jeremy made separately. Notice they're all put in the same bucket. And that makes it easy for us in the various spots you saw in the app so we can all get them and organize them in one place. Finally, Jeremy showed you the notebook opened up in the raw OneNote program, but here you can see it within the context of the Teams tab. So here I have the quarterly meetings, and here's the one that Jeremy just made at the beginning of the call. And so as you can see, everything that we've organized is all within the context of a channel within a given team. And that's how we kind of used it to bucket things and make it so that you could scale it across multiple channels for multiple teams.
Yeah, I think that's it's good to kind of draw that line of where we're storing all the data. And we did specifically make this as a ASP.NET .NET Core application, the back end. And we used SQL for a bunch of reasons, which we'll go into in other meetings and so forth as we do the kind of how you did it drive through. But it just shows you, especially with teams, that there are different ways you can go build these applications. And we felt that because of our most broad audience is the .NET audience, that this made sense to build this sample this way. But this could have been totally built as a React web application with a Node backend. It doesn't have to be .NET, but we, from feedback, have made this sample with that .NET experience. And so I think this is a good segue based on kind of what we've shown so far to introduce Nikola, who is the PM in our PAX division that's kind of in charge of the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. And Nikola, we've talked about the toolkit a bit here, and we've highlighted some of the places where the toolkit has lit up the experience. But do you want to go a little bit deeper into how this is used and the benefits this gives you from a developer perspective?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And thanks for doing a great job, Todd, on actually introducing the toolkit. I think it's great, and it's great to see how much it's used inside of this application and all the work you're doing with it. For visibility for everybody on the call is when Todd and his team started building this, they actually sent a lot of requests our way of things that we needed to do in the toolkit to make sure that they can accomplish their job of building this experience. Because when they designed it, they weren't looking at what the toolkit can do. They were looking at what is a cool scenario they can do with the graph. And then they brought in the toolkit to kind of make that happen. So that allowed us to improve the toolkit quite a bit and add features that we didn't know were required or were usable or needed at a time. So let me share my screen real quick. and then I'll kind of go through a quick overview. So for those that are not familiar with the toolkit, just a quick ramp up. The toolkit is just a set of web components that work with any framework. So just as Jeremy said, they work, you could have used React here, you could have used Vue, whatever you would have used as your front-end framework. These components work just fine. And the other cool part of these things is that they work automatically with the graph. So a lot of times you don't even have to know what the graph calls you need to make for them to work. So for example, in this case, if I use the agenda that Todd showed already, you will see on the side the agenda just starts popping up and showing all your events, which is, I don't have to write a single line of JavaScript code to actually get this to work. Or for example, one of the most useful components is the person component that's used everywhere in the application. If I use person query me, for example, this will kind of just, let me remove the agenda. This will just show the me person. And then one of the cool patterns that we see that developers really want is a person card. So we can actually show a person card on hover here. So every time I hover over this person card, it will show up. Now this is used everywhere inside of the application. So for example, here's the person component. I can actually right click and inspect this if I wanted to. And you can see here is, there it is. That's the MGT person. You can see it right there. And now this one doesn't have a person card on it, but I can actually edit the HTML right here. Let's try to do that real quick. And I can say person card equals. Now, when I hover over it, I have a person card. So it's that easy to actually add that person card there into the application. And I didn't even have to have access to their source code. I could just do it myself. So it kind of shows the power of these components and what they can do inside of this application. Just a quick run through some of the things that we added to enable some of the things that Todd wanted to do. For example, you saw the example of clicking on an event. So we didn't have any click events actually on the agenda or in the task component at all. And for some reason, we didn't think that was necessary. And that is a feature request that Todd actually really needed to make the application work. So we added those click events inside of both the agenda and task component. So now you can actually add an event listener to each component to listen to when a user clicks on the event or on a task, and then handle that in a certain way. Another feature we added was ability to assign users to your tasks. So actually, let me show you how that works. I can show it here. So for example, if I use MGT tasks here, and this is going to show my automatic is going to show all my planner tasks. Give it a second. There it is. I can, for example, click on people. Now I can show a person picker automatically out of the box and assign different people to these tasks. And this works out of the box now on these components. So these are features that got into version 1.1 of the Microsoft Graph Toolkit that anybody can now leverage and use. And the toolkit became better because of the work that Todd and his team did to kind of ideate on this scenario and use the toolkit to make it even better. Just a quick touch up also on another component that was added in 1.1, which I think is important for this audience. And the reason why this component was added is because this is a feedback we got on a previous community call. And that was to add a component that can do random calls to the Microsoft Graph. And we added the MGT get component, for example, that can take any resource from the graph and grab the data and display it inside of your UI without actually having to write any JavaScript code. So for example, if I go to this MGT get.html, this component will, I guess I don't have the permissions. Let's see. Oh, there it is. I don't have, that's actually a good example. I tried to get my messages, but I don't have any permissions approved, and it looks like I need to allow pop-ups. Let's go ahead and do this. And redirect blocked. Actually, I've tested this before. Anyway, it would get my messages or whatever resource from the graph I would suggest, and then you would use a template to kind of render that details from the graph directly into UI. So that way you can just, for example, in this case, list all the different emails on the user's inbox. So it does a data for all the emails in value, which is the raw data you get from the graph. And you can use the subject, the email address, and you can display different things from that email. So you can use any endpoint inside of the graph. So if you want to use the Graph Toolkit and we don't have a component for it, this is a great way to do that. Or if you want to extend a template, this is a great way to call any random API from the graph. And then finally, one of the biggest things that we added to the Graph Toolkit that was required to enable this scenario to work was the proxy provider. Now, when we first shipped the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, we only supported client-side authentication and client-side and making request calls to graph to the client side. So using things like MSL.js or using any other client-side library to make those requests. And it wasn't possible to make requests through your backend to your server. So for example, in this case, where this application uses an ASP.NET app to make all the requests to the graph and then pass them over to the front end, that wasn't possible. So to make that possible, we added a new proxy provider that allows you to proxy any request to the graph through your backend. So the way this is used inside of this application is simply created as a new provider here. You can see they're including the toolkit here through the script. They're creating a new proxy provider that points to this API/MVC graph that they've created on their backend, and also takes in a little. This is attaches a header so it can support the SSO that they need. So that way the user doesn't have to sign in. So that way they can use the SSO through Teams. And so now, because they're using this MGT proxy provider, any component they use inside of the application will know to use their backend to make all the requests to the Microsoft Graph. And on their backend, they have a controller, MVC Graph controller, that handles all of these requests. You can see here, here's the API/MVC graph. And they've implemented a post method, a get method, a delete method, anything that there would graph needs to make any requests. And then all it does, it takes in the request that a component needs, makes that request on the behalf of the component to the Microsoft Graph, and then simply returns the response back to the component. So now any component that's used into the front end can still leverage all of the work they've done on the back end and reuse the same authentication. The user doesn't have to sign in, they can use SSO and still have all the easiness of what the toolkit can do. That is a quick overview of the graph. I want to make sure there's enough time for questions and stuff like that. But again, this wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the work that Todd and his team were doing to make this application. And we love to hear all the cool things that everyone wants to do with the graph and the Graph Toolkit, and if there's anything we can do to make that possible. So if anybody has any suggestions or requests, please work with us, and we would love to kind of add those inside of the toolkit to make it even better that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And it is a great story in terms of the work that was done across kind of the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, the Graph team, the Teams team that helped us with the author side of the things, which we'll cover in more detail in other calls coming up. And so thank you so much, Nikola, for jumping on that so quickly, for Canvas for contributing back to the Graph Toolkit and having to build out this scenario. It was a good exercise to go through with regards to working as a team here, which was great. So while we're waiting for questions, I just want to highlight that all of our Microsoft Graph calls are available on our Office Dev YouTube channel. And the next call will be February the 4th at 8 a.m. And you can add it to your calendar using the Microsoft Graph Call ACA link at the bottom here to add the new series, which has the new join link in it, which is basically the same URL with -join after it. Just as a quick reminder, we also do a weekly Microsoft 365 developer podcast that I host with Paul Schaeflein, who's an MVP based out of Chicago. I just recorded a call with Kevin Bellinger on the new beta profile APIs, which will be out next Monday. And we did some great calls in December, one with Sebastien Levert, who's up in Montreal, on moving your skills to the cloud, that was really focused around kind of being a Microsoft 365 developer, and kind of the evolution that it's taken to move off of kind of on-premises products. It was a great session with Paul and Seb. And then actually Chris O'Brien, who's one of my favorite MVPs that I've learned the last 15 years from his blog and different sessions I've attended at conferences. And he talked about kind of his evolution, how he's moved into the Power Apps and Power Automate world, and kind of this meeting of makers to developers. And I know Todd does a fair bit of work with Power Apps as well. So if you haven't listened to those shows, I highly recommend grabbing that in whatever podcast player that you use. I don't see any questions in the chat other than one from Jake here, which is there a Graph Partner Program? We do not have a TAP program at the minute. We have a developer program which allows you to kind of, as an individual, subscribe in and basically show your interests across the Microsoft 365 developer platform. It gives you a 3 Microsoft 365 tenant. We do via our blog, which the link was already in there, but if you go to graph.microsoft.com, go to resources, when we have things like dev kitchens in Redmond for partners that are under NDA that are signed up through the OCP division, so the One Commercial Partner division. Each region within Microsoft globally has a local OCP partners that you can contact to register as a global partner. And we will communicate with those ISVs to promote dev kitchens that we do across various Microsoft 365 platforms. That's one way you can kind of engage as a partner within Microsoft with the M365 developers. And the best way to do that is by monitoring on the blog when we announce those dev kitchens are coming up. I'm not sure when the next ones are just yet. One from Daniel here. We use Graph API to integrate SharePoint with our in-house applications. Fortunately, Graph API does not seem to support document sets. There is definitely gaps between what the SharePoint, CSOM, and REST APIs do and what Microsoft Graph APIs do. The team inside the SharePoint engineering group that own the APIs across their entire surface are working to close those gaps. I know they're actively working on the taxonomy managed metadata APIs that currently aren't on Graph that are available on CSOM and REST. This is obviously a lot to do with the work that's going on with Project Cortex. I'm not sure where we're at with document sets. I know they recently got new user experience features, and so I would assume that engineering group are working on the APIs. The best way to raise your concerns about gaps like that is actually to go to our user voice. So microsoftgraph.uservoice.com. And you can provide feedback there, and there's categories, like for instance, for SharePoint, which is a work on a graph, to request those document sets. And our program managers there will actually state whether those features are in review or they're in the backlog or they're being worked on. So please go to microsoftgraph.uservoice.com to provide that feedback. Again, some compliments there, some great work, meticulous docs with examples, community support. Thank you. We would work very hard to engage with people here. We love the fact that we had so many people on the call today, so big thank you there. Jake, I'm happy to take that off the line, jthake@microsoft.com, and I can make sure you're all plugged in there from a partner perspective. And Daniel, you're welcome in terms of saying thanks for the answer there on that. So with that, this will be recorded. Please check out everything that's going on inside of the other community calls that are also promoted on the developer blogs on Microsoft 365, and we will see you next month on February the 4th. Thank you again to Nikola and Todd for presenting today, and I'm really excited to see what you do with this sample. It is on GitHub, so we expect to see you have feature ideas. We would love PRs against the sample as you add new features and functionality into this. This is a solution template that we are going to be evolving, so expect a build timeframe that we'll be doing more with this sample, and so we'll evolve this as the platform evolves. So a big thank you to everyone involved, and we will see you next month on February the 4th at 8 a.m. PDT.